Hey, good morning, everybody. We're on the record. We are outside the presence of the jury to discuss the admissibility of the body-worn cam of which witness is it, Mr. Nelson?
Chang.
All right, and I have had a chance to review it. Mr. Frank, the state had an objection.
Good morning, Your Honor. Yes, we do have objections to the body-worn camera video. As I indicated to counsel last night, we would object to admission of Officer Chang's body-worn camera video after the time stamp of 1:15:35. That, as I think I tried to point out, is that Zulu time thing rather than the regular time that the MPDs are in. But it's also running time 5:12 on the scale below. Within that first 5:12, there is a particular piece that we need to talk about because Officer Chang sits in his squad car and runs Mr. Floyd's name while his body cam is looking right at the screen. And information about Mr. Floyd pops up. Some of that is actually you're able to read. And because this, if it's made an exhibit, would be public, we think it's inappropriate to have information about Mr. Floyd on that screen available as an exhibit or generally to the public. So somehow that has to be obscured. We don't care if a black box is put over it, if it's obscured in some way. But it's within that portion of the rest of the video we recognize is admissible and relevant. Because that time frame is the incident itself. Officer Chang arrives, interacts with the two officers and Mr. Floyd as they go over. After Officer Chang comes back over to the Dragon Walk side of 38th Street, he admits in a statement he no longer sees what's going on over there. Because this is a reasonable officer standard, as we all know, what happens after the restraint and across the street on 38th is simply irrelevant to the issues at hand. So after that point in the video is where we believe it reasonably loses any relevance. After that point, of course, there's audio, and Officer Chang speaks to the two individuals that were passengers in the car, and it's just full of hearsay. And some of that would be offered to prove, we believe, the truth of the matters asserted in those statements about what happened. So it's full of hearsay after that. There is a moment where Officer Chang, towards the end, is standing around as the officers do some follow-up. And this court allowed video of that time period as relevant to conducting or finishing their investigation. So I see where the court might find that particular period of Officer Chang's video to have some relevance. So in that sense, we would object to that portion, really as cumulative, because, of course, the better video of that has already been admitted with Officer Chauvin's body cam during that time period when Officer King comes out. I believe that was the court's ruling about why that's relevant. It shows something about the intentions of their investigation. So our objections are being able to read the screen in Officer Chang's squad car if he pulls up the information about Mr. Floyd. After 1:15:35 is simply not relevant. It's full of hearsay and potentially a cumulative objection as well. Thank you.
If we were to characterize this as bystander video of the bystanders near the Dragon Walk, who were the people that Mr. Floyd was with earlier that day, or earlier before this going into the store, how is it different from the bystander videos that the state offered and played with regard to statements that were made? And
the other bystanders are part of the incident. Certainly the defense has regularly cross-examined about the tone of voice of those bystanders and their effect, apparently, on Mr. Chauvin at the scene. They are part of the incident itself. They cannot really be separated from the issues involved in the restraint and the reasonableness of it. And fully expect that's why there was no objection to that. This is a video of across the street. In my review of the video, you can't even hear what's going on in this video until the ambulance has come and gone, and one of the witnesses starts to walk this way, towards the Dragon Walk. So it does not capture the relevant interactions and portions of the incident.
Okay. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I would break Mr. Chang's video into kind of three relevant sections, or three pertinent sections, I should say. The first being the initial reaction as described by Mr. Frank, the first approximate 5 minutes of the video. And then there is a second period of time where Officer Chang is dealing with the passengers. And then the third part of the video I would characterize as the occurrences after the ambulance has arrived and left, and what happens there. In terms of the first section, I do believe that it is relevant to the analysis. It shows another perspective of what was happening at that particular moment. I would need to figure out fairly quickly how to get that blocked, how to get those portions of the computer screen blocked that contain information about Mr. Floyd. There's that section. I don't think, subject to that redaction, I don't think the state apparently objects to that. The second part, I believe, is relevant because it shows another officer's reaction to what is going on. It shows other bystanders' reactions to what is going on. And you can see during that period that Officer Chang is pacing kind of back and forth, trying to split his attention between the passengers and also observing what's happening across the street. Again, in terms of the reaction to the crowd and the crowd growing more and more vociferous as time progresses. So I do think it's relevant because it shows it from a distance. It shows Officer Chang walking. It shows at scenes where people are standing on other sides of the street. It shows the traffic. It shows people slowing down and watching. There's a lot of information that can be gleaned from that segment. The third segment, I think, is also relevant because it demonstrates, again, the continuing efforts of the police and also the continuing interactions with the citizens who observed. And goes to, as is being alluded to, is that if the crowd was a distraction or the officers perceived this gathering of people, whether we want to call it a crowd or a group or whatever, whether the officers perceived that to be a risk or a threat, and how that may have continued and ultimately influenced officers' decisions. So I believe it is highly relevant. I do not believe it is hearsay in the sense of you don't hear anything, essentially very little that the officers say. The officers don't talk about what just happened over there, with one small exception relevant to Mr. Williams and Ms. Hansen. There's some comments there. I believe that part may already be in one of the other body cameras. I'd have to go back and double check. That being said, Your Honor, I don't think it's cumulative because it again shows a different perspective. It shows a reaction of another police officer and what he was doing. It shows the surroundings from a different perspective and is highly relevant to the trier fact.
I have reviewed the entire thumb drive that contains the exhibit, and I do find that it is relevant and not cumulative to a certain point. I would note that the body cam includes video from a distance, what is happening in front of Cup Foods, but also the timing of when the fire engine 17 shows up. And since the emergency EMS response has been litigated in this case and is relevant as to when EMS showed up, when the fire engine showed up, firefighter Hansen specifically described how she would assume it'd be within 3 minutes. This puts that in a time frame on the EMS call, and so that is relevant. And to the extent that there are any statements made I find they're not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, or to the extent they are, they fall into the residual exception, because these are people just making comments of their observations at the scene. There's no motive for them to lie or anything else, so they would certainly be reliable. They're not inculpatory in any way, and so I think it would fall into the 807 residual hearsay, even if it is offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but it does not appear to be that the state is trying, or the defense is trying to prove the truth of the matter asserted. So with that, I am going to order that you redact the part when the officer is looking up on the computer. I think for today's purposes, you can simply fast forward through it 30 seconds or so when he's in, when you get to that point. That way the jury won't see it when you publish it today, but it's got to be redacted. You got to take it back, and before we submit this to the jury for deliberation, it has to be taken out. So basically, when he gets in the squad until when he gets back out of the squad. And I'll advise him that it's been edited to take out irrelevant materials up until the time the fire engine leaves. Anything after that is not really relevant. To some extent, it is cumulative, as the state has said. But up through the time the fire engine leaves is appropriate. So with that redaction in the middle and the ending after the fire engine leaves, the body-worn cam will be admissible.
I should be able to, within about 10 minutes, accomplish that.
All right. You can actually accomplish the redaction within 10 minutes?
I would just be cutting those clips out rather than trying to put some sort of black screen on. And
That would be my preference.
And so if I can have about 10 minutes, Your Honor.
Let's reconvene. Let's bring the jury back at 9:30, and we'll start at 9:30.